Hi, I'm Caden here with my brother,
Cal,
and you're watching Eating W's.
eat the W.
That's a W. Let's eat one. Let's eat one. That's a W.
On today's episode of Eating W's, we have our NFL Week 15 recap for the 2024 NFL season. But before we jump into those games, just a couple of news bits. Most of the news bits coming as detrimental all to one team in this case scenario. The Detroit Lions, after losing to the Buffalo Bills last week, not only lost two defensive players, but lost one of their Sonic and Knuckles duo. They placed all three: running back David Montgomery, starting cornerback Carlton Davis, and starting defensive tackle Aleem McNeil. All three go on injury reserve this week. And I am blanking on his name right now, but a backup slot corner that went in after Carlton Davis went out also got placed on injury reserve this week.
Khalil Dorsey.
Yes. So they are down two people in the secondary, one person on the defensive line, and a running back, which is probably the biggest part of it, is that running back, considering how their offense is and that kind of Sonic and Knuckles combination they had between David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. So it should be very interesting how the Lions adjust as the year goes on. But Dan Campbell has already talked about it. He already talked about kind of a next man up mentality and how to play through adversity only in a way Dan Campbell could. So if you haven't looked up that video or heard that speech yet, highly recommend it. It was a really good one. Love to hear that guy talk. But then past the injuries, we have not an injury, but still somebody hitting the sidelines. The Atlanta Falcons, we are recording this on Tuesday night, quite literally just announced that they are benching Kirk Cousins and starting rookie quarterback Michael Penix Jr. from here on out for the rest of the year, which I actually really liked when I was thinking that the Falcons were out of the playoffs. But the Falcons are very far from out of the playoffs. They are only one game behind the Buccaneers in that NFC South race. And since they beat them twice, they hold the tiebreaker. So they are truly just one game behind. I mean, they really still control their own destiny in a way. I mean, unless the Bucs went out. But it's just crazy to think about that they've kind of given up on Kirk Cousins that way after signing him to so much money for a 4-year deal.
Yeah.
Like, I get you draft your rookie. I get he hasn't been playing very well, but you're still in a prime position to go to the playoffs. It's an interesting move to go ahead and decide it's time for your rookie, but nonetheless, we will see how it plays out for them starting week 16.
Cousins has a no trade clause, so he dictates what he does in his own off-season movement, whether that stays with Atlanta or goes elsewhere. He gets to choose where he wants to go, basically.
God, like I said, I won't go too far because I already talked about it last week, but the real MVP in the league this year is that man's agent, because it's
just him another deal.
It's just crazy the stuff that he works out with these teams. But nonetheless, should be an interesting finish to the year for the Atlanta Falcons. We'll see if they're able to still make a playoff run even with the rookie quarterback. But before we start looking into the future, we will jump back into the past and talk about the games last week, starting with the Packers game, which was the Sunday night football game. We had the Green Bay Packers heading to Seattle to take on the Seahawks and pick up a dominating road win by a score of 30-13.
Yes, this was another very good win for the Packers, who continue to show that they're really one of the top teams in the NFL. The only teams they lose to are other top teams. So they have an undefeated record against teams that aren't the Vikings, Lions, or Eagles.
The top three teams
in the NFL, or at least in the NFC for sure. So, the score shows that they are one of the better teams in the NFL, because the Seahawks are no pushover. They were leading the NFC West, and now they are no longer not leading the NFC West after this loss. But it was a really good game by the Packers, and a complete game by the Packers, where the multiple receivers stepped up. You got Jaden Reed involved again after being held catchless against the Lions the previous week. And the big player to step up was Romeo Doubs, who had both touchdown catches, including a really nice snag in the second half for his second touchdown catch to really put the game away in the late in the fourth quarter. If you haven't seen that catch, it's a really nice one. He snags it right off the ground in the back of the end zone. So,
Yeah, a true shoestring on that
yeah,
one.
it was really a good one. They had to review it even. It was so close. But another nice game by Josh Jacobs. He didn't go over 100 yards or have 3 touchdowns, but he did have 80 yards and a touchdown, which is really all you need from your running back. It was a really consistent performance. He didn't really have any negative plays, which are always good. Jordan Love, speaking of negative plays, had no negative plays again. Another turnoverless game, which is now his 4th in a row after having 1 in the first 9. So he really turned it around in the second half. I mean, he did it last year where
Same thing last year.
it
Yeah.
just kind of clicks for him, and it's really clicked for him again on another level in the second half this year. So we'll have to hope that continues for Jordan Love as they go on to face more easier opponents next week. But it was a nice game for the Seahawks. Geno Smith got hurt, and Sam Howell came in. So the Seahawks were never really able to get a consistent offense going, and they both had interceptions by the Packers defense. So again, interceptions and turnovers for the Packers. More good news for the Packers defense. They add to their interception and turnover numbers, and another really nice win, even though it was in Seattle, which is a tough place to play.
Certainly, being in Seattle and picking up a win is always a good thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Packers did prey on an easy target a little bit here. I mean, like you said, with the injuries to Geno Smith, which happened in the game, not before. But even before the game, they've had a lot of rotation on their offensive line. Didn't have Kenneth Walker for this game. Zach Charbonnet was their starting running back, who's a very good starting running back in his own right. But when you can get that 1-2 punch with Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker, who's definitely a better running back overall, really helps out. But one good thing for the Packers is, if I'm not mistaken, they did have a pretty healthy defense. At least off the top of my head, I can't think of any huge names on their defense that
Quay
were
Walker got hurt, and our defense gets better when he's off the field.
Literally less penalties, at least. At the very
penalties,
least. Yeah.
He's just played not very well this year. He gets beaten pass coverage often. He stands in the middle of the field and gets caught staring down running backs. He has to play because he's a first-round pick. He's one of those guys, but he's not going to get his 5th-year option picked up.
Who came in? Is Eric Wilson your backup still?
No, our rookie, Edgerrin Cooper.
Edgerrin Cooper out of
came in
USC.
And had one of the interceptions, in fact. So very outstanding play for Edgerrin Cooper.
Yeah, another guy that, he'll play just because he's a first-round pick. But
second-round pick.
Oh, yeah, he was a second guy. The second guy. Eric Tackle was your first.
We really hit out of the park with those second-round picks. Jaden Reed, Devontae Adams in the past.
Yep.
Jordy Nelson was a second-round pick. So really, really good second-round picks in the past for the Packers.
You guys should just start trading away your first. Why are you even taking
I know,
first-round picks?
First-round
They
picks
never work out.
Ends up to be kind of middle of the pack, or I wouldn't say busts, but middle of the pack players.
Your first-round picks are only good if they sit on the bench for like 5 years before you put them in.
Yeah, or that.
That's just the way it works out. But no, I mean, the Seahawks defense was really healthy for everything I can think of, and the Packers offense really just didn't miss a beat against them, putting up 30 points pretty dominantly, putting up 30 points.
I
Probably could have put up more.
I like that we put up 14 early. Well, so the crowd was raucous, they were loud, and we went in there and we shut them down almost immediately.
Big time.
And that's huge because we're going to have a lot of road games in these playoffs. So
yeah,
we'll see how that turns out.
All road game. No,
more than likely.
Depending on how it lands. But yeah, very likely all road games there. So that is a good thing to be able to do. So yeah, I mean, I don't think that this was the truest test by any means for the Packers, but it was a middle of the road test. It was kind of what can you do against these middle of the pack opponents, and they did a win and more. They went out there and absolutely swept them. So like you said, they got one more chance against that upper echelon team record-wise with the Vikings, not next week, but the week after. So that's kind of their final chance to show like, hey, we're supposed to be here. We're not just
can be one of the
we're not just beating up on these lower teams. So
not just wait for the playoffs.
That's really going to be their prove it moment. If they go into Minnesota? No, I think it'll be.
No, it's
in Minnesota. If they can go into Minnesota week 17 and pick up a win, that will be the true okay. They're actually supposed to be this high up in the rankings. They're actually supposed to have this record. But We will see when we get to that. But speaking of the Minnesota Vikings, next up we have their game. We have the Chicago Bears head to Minneapolis, just as the Packers are going to take on the Vikings. And the Vikings pick up a win by one more point differential than the Packers did. The Vikings win by a score of 30-12 this time around. I thought that this was one of the more complete games that we played all year. Again, just like normal, we scored the most points in the first quarter and fourth quarter. What we've done like every game this year. I don't get what those middle quarters, why they get us so bad. But we had no scoreless quarters. Second quarter did only have a field goal, but huge field goal because good to see Will Reichard back. Love to see him going 2 for 2 on field goals, or 3 for 3 rather, on field goals throughout the game and not missing an extra point. Awesome to see that from him coming off that injury. He's a very good kicker. I think he's, knock on wood, I don't even want to really say it, but I think that he's actually going to be our first kicker that like just stays, like is just truly good all the way through. Exactly, a long-term answer. I mean, every time we've had even a decent kicker like Greg Joseph, Blair Walsh, they've always faded away and never really stayed very long. So I'm hoping this can really be it. But that's, we're talking about, you want to talk about future. That's really in the future. We'll see how long he lasts. But back into the present, I just think that this was a really good game by the Vikings. I was very nervous about this one, as you heard me talk about last week. It seems like this game, Monday Night Football in US Bank Stadium against the Bears, is always a tough one. And a lot of the times, the Bears are actually able to find a way to come out on top, even when they're very much the underdog. So the fact that we were able to go out there and dominate them by 18 points, 2 whole possessions, almost 3 possessions, or is 3 possessions rather, that's just so relaxing, for the lack of a better word, to see that we can really beat up on these teams when we need to, the teams that we should beat up on, because we've also kind of shown that when we need to step up and go against these good teams, we played pretty well in those too. We've been playing to our competition all year, which is a really good thing when you're playing those good teams, but it's a not so good when you're playing these lower teams. But just awesome to see. Justin Jefferson had 2 touchdowns. He's been continuing that streak. That's now 2 games in a row with 2 receiving touchdowns, which is pretty cool to see. Jordan Addison didn't have his 3 touchdown game like he had last week, but he still played very well. It was a very good game for him. So just a good, complete game, which is what this team needed so bad. I think that having this game where we didn't have any huge miscues, the offense was by no means what it should have been through that middle of the game, through the second and third quarter. But even when it wasn't what it should have been, it was still moving down the field. It was still playing okay. The only turnover we had was that kind of garbage time or kind of useless interception by Sam Darnold on that 4th down to Tyreek Stevenson. So it's just awesome to see that, and I hope that it builds a lot of momentum heading into these next week, because we are now, Lions hold the tiebreaker. I think even if we do beat them, they'll still hold the tiebreaker unless we beat the Packers and the Lions.
Sure how that
I think if the Vikings win out, we win, with that Week 18 matchup being against the Lions, and then they would have an extra loss.
Yeah, it comes down to
division-wise.
Is the first tiebreaker.
I'd be really interested to see how that tiebreaker falls if we win out. Or we're tied with the Lions. So if we beat them, as long as we win out, we're in. If we win out, we're the first seed. I guess it'd fall.
Depending on what Philly
it'd fall to how the Philly tiebreaker goes. Yeah. Okay, yeah, this is all way too confusing.
That really gets confusing. Then it comes down to conference record, I think.
Moral of the story: if the Vikings win out, we are going to be in a very good position. So hopefully, to loop back to where my point was, this game of beating up on a lesser team might seem like nothing, but it could really be a huge momentum boost in the long run, and could be a huge start to a streak here that gets us to first place in the NFC North, possibly first place in the NFC period. So now moving on to the next game, which was what we marked as our game of the week. Oh, wait, I cut right over you, didn't I?
Yeah.
You got anything to say?
I mean, you covered most of it.
Yeah.
Although 2 players you didn't talk about that stepped up was T.J. Hawkinson, went over 50 yards again and didn't have a touchdown, but shows that he's having a nice presence in that offense. And Aaron Jones, who is showing that running game is really coming into its own late in the season here. He had 2 touchdowns also, I believe.
No, Cam Akers took one.
Yeah, that's right. Cam Akers took one. He didn't have but he had one of the touchdowns, I do believe. So Really a nice game for Aaron Jones, and if that running game can really get a two-headed monster going with Akers and Jones running, then look out because the Vikings could end up winning out if they get their running game going. Because you already know the passing game's dangerous.
Yeah, it's a tough schedule. Next week we got a little bit of a break against the Seahawks just because of their injury issues that we already talked about. But then it's against Green Bay in Minnesota and then at Detroit. So really tough into the year. But you got to beat these good teams now if you want to beat them in January and February. So it'll be a great challenge. So now, actually, moving on to what we marked as our game of the week last week, we had what certainly was the game of the week last week with the Buffalo Bills heading into Detroit, as I just said, to take on the Lions and picking up a win on the road by the score of 48-42. Now, this game was an amazing game by the Buffalo Bills, and it was a hell of a game by the Lions, too, but it apparently was almost too good of a game by the Lions. I think they might have been playing too hard or something, because they were just dropping like flies. We already talked about the fact that they put 4 different guys on IR this week. They had other guys go down throughout the course of the games that are not going on IR, but did have injuries and kind of got some bumps and bruises that took them out for few plays at a time, or maybe even the rest of the game at the time, just depending on who and what the injury was. But the Bills, and more than anything, Josh Allen is just, it's almost like unfair at this point. I mean, he just is better. It's like it's like the definition of a man playing against boys. It's like when you're at a Thanksgiving family thing and then there's that one like real athlete there and the rest of the family just like thinks that they can play football and they just dominate. That's literally what it looks like. It looks like he's just playing some backyard football out there, and damn, does he do it well. It is just almost puts you speechless. I mean, what else do you say other than it's just elite play? I mean, we've been talking about it a lot. You've heard me talk about it a lot, that I thought Saquon should be the MVP. I thought that he was playing the best. But after these last 2 weeks, Saquon hasn't played bad, but he has not played like an MVP. And Josh Allen has just been the essential MVP. He has been everything an MVP should be. So at this point, I don't know how he doesn't win the MVP unless he literally has like the worst 3-game span to end the year that you've ever seen. But they don't really have the toughest opponents throughout those 3 games. So I very much don't see that happening. In fact, I only see him stat padding from here because they're still fighting for that first seed in the AFC, depending on how everything falls with the Chiefs. So they played their hearts out in this game and got a win against a really good team, the Detroit Lions in Detroit, which was bigger than anything, rather. Absolutely huge for them there. Great game by the Lions, but just a better game by pretty much Josh Allen.
Yeah, this game was won by Josh Allen once again, which we talked about a lot this season, how he puts on the cape and plays hero ball. And he started off right away by playing hero ball, by scoring the first 2 touchdowns to put the Bills up 14-0. And I almost wanted to say the game was over then. But really, there was a lot of scoring left, and the Lions tried to come back and tried a couple onside kicks, and that didn't work out so well for the onside kicks because they had Mac Hollins almost run it back on them. So that was interesting to see because it was an early onside kick. There was like 12 minutes left in the fourth quarter.
12 minutes down by 10 is all. And they went for an onside kick. And like you just said, Mac Hollins brought it back to like the 5-yard line of the Lions. So really made him pay for a questionable decision there.
Yeah, it really was. But that's one of those aggressive decisions that Dan Campbell does and that he's become known for. So sometimes it bites him in the kneecaps. So, it don't work every time. So we'll see how those aggressive decisions come out in the playoffs, if they're just as aggressive or even more aggressive.
Oh, yeah. I mean, alternate universe, just kind of playing what if for fun. I mean, they get that onside kick right there. You have so much momentum, they probably go down and score a touchdown. Then all of a sudden you're down by 3 with 8 minutes left, depending on how long your scoring drive was. It's a whole different game. But the Bills made it a whole different game in reality with that return that they had and really kind of put the nail in the coffin, to be honest, a little earlier than they probably should have been. But now moving on to what we picked as our game of the week, which there was not very many options this week, to say the least. There was not a ton of good games outside of those 3 that we just talked about. And those, other than the one, of course, wasn't really those good of games either. The Vikings and Packers weren't. But for his game of the week, Callan went ahead and picked the Indianapolis Colts heading to Denver to take on the Broncos, and the Broncos winning at home by a score of 31-13.
Yes, and it was a nice win by the Broncos, and it was similar to what game we talked about last week, where the Broncos scored 21 points in the fourth quarter and really put this game away. What was a close game became a blowout in the fourth quarter, which is similar to a game we talked about, I want to say last week, when the Vikings scored 21 against
The Falcons, yep.
The Falcons, yep. So interesting games that they both unfolded like that. But as far as this Broncos game goes, I want to talk about one play, and it was the Jonathan Taylor near miss touchdown run, where he fumbled the ball at the goal line, and not tackled, fumbled. I mean, celebratory dropped the ball
Dropped it early.
before crossing the goal line, and I just can't believe that this still happens in the NFL. And it happens to such, I want to say, I never thought of Jonathan Taylor as the big show-off kind of guy. So I always thought he was someone who was more secure with the ball and wouldn't do that, but he did, and it happened again, where you see this at least once a month during football season, whether that's college or NFL.
It used to be like once a year at each level, maybe, but yeah, it's gotten only more consistent, which is insane.
It does happen, and I can't believe that it happens, because if you want to drop the ball or spike the ball or whatever, just make sure you cross the goal line. I don't get it. It's one of those things that just probably makes coaches pull their hair out.
If you can't look down and see nothing but colored turf, hold on to that.
Hold on to the ball.
All through like high school, the rule is if you score a touchdown, find the ref, give him the ball. Then nothing can happen. No celebration penalties, no fumbling early, no anything.
Right.
And just when it's a cemented thing in high school, how do you see it happen so much in college and NFL?
Yes,
it's just insane.
It should be common sense and instinct to just cross the goal line first. But that play really switched momentum. And it's one thing I really would be interested in seeing if Fox or CBS would put up a momentum bar where it shows how much momentum is towards the Broncos and towards the Colts, and just seeing that switch instantly when that fumble happens, because Broncos took that momentum and scored 3 touchdowns with it.
Did not stop.
So it's a real thing. It happens in all sporting events. There's momentum, and it's interesting to see when team momentum takes over and it can swing a game just like that.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about it all the time that no one play ever loses a game, but there's always that one play, that one big play that you can point at and say, this lost us the game, which it never really does, because every play loses you a game or wins you a game. But there's always one play that you can point at that's really like, oh, that's a big one.
That's the game-losing play.
That was the game-losing play in this scenario. I mean, they're up by 3 points at that time. It's 13-10 Colts. A touchdown puts them up 20-10 going into the fourth quarter. All the momentum in the world after a long touchdown run by their star player, Jonathan Taylor. But instead, all of a sudden, now it remains 13-10, and the Broncos have the ball at the 25-yard line to start the fourth quarter. And like you said, once that momentum switched, the Broncos were doing nothing to let that metaphorical momentum bar push anywhere near back to that blue or Indianapolis' side of things. It was just an absolute blowout from there on out, which I was nervous and kind of questioning the Broncos being a playoff team and sitting at that 7 seed in the AFC right now. But I must say, after seeing that, it makes me a lot more confident, because especially on a team with a young quarterback like Bo Nix, you usually don't see him, harness potential or harness momentum that well. I mean, the fact that they were able to grab that and run with it was just really cool to see. So, I mean, as a 7 seed, you're kind of like the punching bag. You're just there as like a hope. You're probably going to go in and get destroyed by the 2 seed. But it'd still be really fun to see a rookie like Bo Nix go in at that 7 seed and just see what he can do against probably the Bills at this case scenario.
The Bills or the Chiefs.
Which, I mean, if they have to go into Buffalo, just those poor people. That's all I have to say for Bo Nix. But it'll still be fun to see him make it nonetheless.
I guess the Steelers still have a chance if they win on Christmas against the Chiefs. So
yeah, that's true.
The Steelers aren't ruled out. They're the dark horse for the 1st seed.
That would be quite hilarious, actually, if the Steelers won it. But now moving on to our final game this week. In my game of the week, we had what, outside of the ones we already talked about, was probably the closer game. Really shouldn't have been, but we had the Washington Commanders on the road heading to New Orleans to take on the Saints, and both Jake Haener and Spencer Rattler, who both played as their starting quarterback throughout that game. And the Saints just literally barely eke out a win by a score of 20-19. Now, the Saints had this game, or probably the Commanders had this game in the bag for most of it. Jaden Daniels came out and threw 2 really nice touchdown passes, both to Terry McLaurin to start the game. The Commanders went to halftime with a 14-0 lead. The defense was just absolutely dominating Jake Haener. And then all of a sudden, the Saints made this switch, and Spencer Rattler came out as their, I can't remember if they started him right after the second half or when exactly went in, but at some time relatively early in the second half, Spencer Rattler comes in at quarterback, and you could kind of just see the tide shift. I mean, he was actually playing pretty well. I have to give him some props. He was all of a sudden moving the ball with the Saints a little bit. He put up a couple of touchdowns, was able to get them in the end zone. The one big touchdown and the one real momentum switch was a trick play in which I can't remember who, but one of the receivers threw a touchdown to Alvin Kamara, who made an awesome one-handed catch. And that was just like, oh man, like they're in this game all of a sudden. Like this is actually a game now. And the Commanders it's a perfect segue because like I just said, usually you don't see rookies take advantage of momentum like Bo Nix did in that game. They're usually just still a little immature. They're just still not even really making mistakes by any means, but just can't really drive the other team into the ground with the momentum like Bo Nix did. And Jaden Daniels was an exact example of that in the situation. I mean, they had so much momentum coming out of halftime, and they just really weren't able to hold on to things. They do just barely by like a finger hold on to the ledge and win this game. But I mean, Alvin Kamara goes out in the fourth quarter in this game. If Alvin Kamara continues to play, I truly think we see a different outcome here.
Yeah.
I think we see a Saints win if Alvin Kamara plays this whole game.
If Kamara is playing, they give him the ball in that 2-point conversion.
And I think he gets it. So, of course, yeah, like Cal just mentioned, came down to a fourth 2-point conversion, and the Commanders were able to stop him. They weren't able to stop him on the goal line for the touchdown, but they were able to stop him on the 2-point. So, was it pretty? No, not at all. But is it a mark in the win column? Hell yes. And that's all that really matters.
Yep, it was another close win for the Commanders, who continue to show that even with a rookie quarterback and a depleted receiving corps, that they have put together a really nice season. And really, they would probably be in a more secure playoff spot had it not be for the NFC North taking up 3 of the top 3 seeds. So at 9-5, you're usually looking at a 6, maybe a 5, but instead they're just barely holding on to that 7 seed. So we'll have to see if they're able to hold on to that 7 seed throughout the rest of the season. But if they're able to play like they did against the Saints, then I believe that they will, because they did play a good game. They just had I think they kind of got ahead of themselves. They kind of thought the game was over when it really wasn't. And they let Spencer Rattler come in and give the Saints a spark. And let me tell you, had Kamara not gotten hurt on that touchdown catch, I think it's a different game, because Kamara really started to catch fire after that. Well, but he started gaining a lot of momentum on himself personally. He really was the setup and the catalyst for that one touchdown. And he would have kept the ball rolling had he not gotten hurt. I just know it, because he was really catching fire. So it's a good win for the Commanders, a sad loss for the Saints, and we'll have to see if the Commanders can carry this momentum into next week.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I think they definitely took the foot off the gas pedal, kind of threw their arms back and relaxed a little bit, which you cannot do in the NFL. You can do that in college because you're facing lesser opponents a lot of the year. But every team in the NFL is good in their own right. So you cannot do that at this level. But that was our NFL Week 15 recap for the 2024 NFL season. Thank you all so much for watching, and make sure you stay tuned in until tomorrow for our Week 16 predictions. But until then, don't forget
to eat the W.